It was used based on a compassionate basis. There's what we call the compassionate use of drugs that have not been cleared. There's what we call FDA approval. Now, don't forget that this is a drug that was designed in the US, and you can approach the FDA for compassionate use of those drugs. But I think that will fall within American citizens. I don't think outside America you can use drugs on a compassionate basis just like that. There are a lot of legal ramifications to some of these things.
So we still have to wait for the researchers to finish with the job.
And just like what the American president said, in strengthening public health institutions, public health protocols, breaking the chain or interrupting the chain of transmission, that is what we should be targeting right now.
All right. Since there is no cure, all these things, ZMAP or whatever, no. What is done for an Ebola patient when he arrives at an isolation center? Okay,
like you rightly mentioned, the case fatality ranges from 50 to 90%. So it's a spectrum. Some have very severe fulminant disease, some not so severe and fulminant. The first thing is to protect the healthcare worker who is coming in contact with that patient with the use of personal protective equipment. Some of them I will call hazmat, hazardous material suits. These hazmat suits are such that the healthcare provider is in a different atmosphere, just like the space suit you have. He has an oxygen tank. This is in very esoteric cases.
He has his oxygen tank?
Yes. If we're talking about, there's what we call biosafety levels. We have level 1, 2, 3, 4. At level 4, you're dealing with exotic pathogens, which Ebola is one of them. And then when you've come in contact with the patient, you isolate the patient, you put the person in a clean room, you quarantine the person. If you're going to feed the person, there will be no contact between you. In fact, whatever utensils that person uses will be discarded. Nobody will use it. Plastic.
It's a very expensive venture.
There could be an aperture. You pass it through the aperture. The patient eats what he wants to eat. You know, his effluent, his excreta, his urine are secluded from society. You see, Ebola is not a
But he does eat. Well, do they pass
if he's able to take oral
fluids through him,
yes,
and all that?
Another aspect is you want to rehydrate the person. You want to expand because there's a contraction of fluid volume because of the bleeding in the very severe cases. So what we call supportive therapy.
Okay.
All these are supportive therapy. There are blood thins and clots, alternatively. So there are drugs to help to regulate or to help with that. So the mainstay is largely supportive therapy, hoping that the virus will burn itself out and the body's innate immune system will take over and help to fight and combat. If there are any other infections,
so it's essentially the person's immune system that handles it, but
which has already been dealt with massively
by the virus.
By the virus itself, which has broken down so many things, it has broken through so many barriers.
So essentially what you're doing is you're just sustaining the patient long enough for his immune system.
Hoping that at the end of the day, at least in most cases, like I said, the mortality is high. A few subset might outgrow. But I also want to mention that even in some survivors, there are some permanent sequelae, complications. Some of them develop deafness, some of them develop blindness, so even among the survivors, there's still some, sequelae.
Some permanent marks left behind.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, there's this rumor, it went rife. We know it's not true, it doesn't work, but it's all over the place. People are talking about bathing in salt water and drinking salt water.
We call that brine.
The Minister of Health has totally refuted this and said it's absolute rubbish. But what are some of the complications that could result, from such behavior?
I think somebody just wants to sell salt, just on a lighter note. There is the use of what we call saline solutions in rehydrating some of these people and helping to expand their fluid volume. This contains sodium, which is part of salt. This has nothing to do with the treatment or the curative aspect of Ebola. I'm talking about this salt water that has been bandied around. It has no role in treatment. It has no role in management. And someone who is hypertensive, who takes a lot of this brine, can worsen his hypertension. And then it can cause a lot of other derangements in the body. So we need to throw that out of the window.
I mean, if water is not pure, shouldn't we just stick to our traditional methods of boiling and cooling the way we've always been doing?
That to some
that
extent,
would kill the virus, wouldn't it?
That's a tough one. That is a tough one. This virus is a very hardy virus.
Okay.
And we need to understand something about viruses, that viruses are almost next to the smallest elements of human life. There are some of life. There are some life forms that are smaller than viruses. Viruses, they don't need much to survive. Outside the human host, for some example, like HIV, dies readily.
When does Ebola die? When it's outside the host? How long can it live?
I don't have the specifics, but I know that, for example, in a dead body, Ebola that dead body is still highly infectious.
Yeah, because I mean, there's still a lot of stuff to feed off in the body.
Within the dead host, it can still do a lot. It can still wreak a lot of havoc to morticians, to pallbearers.
But how about just on any surface?
Just on any surface.
Cloth, table, kitchen counter.
If there are secretions on that table, for some time period, it is still infectious. So we are dealing with something that is really hardy, something that is really fastidious. It doesn't just go away like that. I was telling you the story about some individual who contracted Lassa fever, which is virulent, but not as virulent as Ebola. The dead body had to be put in 3 layers of caskets. One casket into another casket into another casket, sealed and padlocked. And they specified burying that body below 6 feet, maybe as much as 9 to 10 feet. So these viral agents, in fact, we'll call them exotic pathogens. Another dangerous dimension with them is that there's also the aspect of the worry about bioterrorism, the risk of these things being weaponized. So these are highly, highly dangerous things to deal with.
Okay. That's some dimension there.
Yes.
There are different levels of contact with this Ebola virus.
Yes.
There's the level of the hunter. They believe that that's where it all started because of the fruit bats, in the forest and all that. The hunter goes there, he gets it. How can we address that? Because hunters, I don't think they're going to stop working.
Well, in 1976, the first index case was linked to the fruit bats and gorillas and chimpanzees in the Yambuku River, close to that region where Ebola was discovered. And doing retrospective analysis, they were able to tie it down to hunting some of these meats. The other epidemics started with people just seeing the carcasses of dead animals and eating those dead animals.
Okay.
And the virus was still transmitted. Touching dead animals, touching dead monkeys, touching dead chimpanzees, dead gorillas. It was still, so that leads us back that even in the dead, even outside, it is still highly infectious, very, very, very much infectious. I need to mention that in Sub-Saharan Africa, there are about 4 variants. We have the Sudan Ebola, or the Zaire Ebola. We have the Cote d'Ivoire Ebola. We have the one in Uganda. There's also one outside called the Reston variant, which
that's the animal one.
Yes, which is found in macaque.
Do they all behave differently?
The first 4, which I mentioned, the Sudan, the Cote d'Ivoire, the Congo DR, and the Zaire, the Sudan rather, they behave similarly in the sense that there is efficient transmission from animal to man and man to man. But the Reston is more efficient within the animal. Though there have been cases of accidental inoculation in laboratory workers who are handling some of these cases. But the first 4 are basically similar.
Okay, let's go to another thing. Just recently, the Minister of Health was talking about the usage of gloves. And yes, he said something about, don't use them indiscriminately because it could, cause another problem. What problem could?
Well, other than safe disposal of these gloves, and of course...
okay, there's a way you have to take them off anyway.
Apart from, the way you have to take them, you have to peel it up. You have to peel it from the underside. It's not that you just move your glove like this. You have to peel from under.
And make sure your hand doesn't touch the
discard, appropriately, and then the waste disposal authorities will incinerate or take care of those things appropriately. But there are different types of gloves also. But those ones also will have to do with healthcare workers.
Okay. We were talking about burials just a while back. You've dealt efficiently with that issue of, the body being very virulent, very dangerous.
Yes.
But should we be more careful? Okay, let me put it this way. What kind of death should excite our suspicion that this could be Ebola?
Okay, before I answer that question, I want to go back to the issue of burial. Cremation is the best.
Okay.
Cremation, you just want to burn and get rid of whatever in a controlled atmosphere. Cremation. But any case in which they could not arrive at a diagnosis before the death of that person, there has to be a high index of suspicion. Sudden collapse, sudden circulatory, permit me to use the medical jargon, the person just collapses all of a sudden, as is happening in Liberia, and people just walking on the streets and
just fall
collapsing,
down.
Persistent fever that is not, the person, of course, people will think of malaria in this environment. The malaria is not going, the person's situation is deteriorating or worsening. One has to have a high, because diagnosing Ebola is not very easy. It's a very exotic pathogen, and there are exotic tests, if I may use that word, in confirming Ebola.
At this point, I think we really ought to take a break.
We should.
We'll be back in a moment. Let's take this break, and when we come back, your contributions, your questions. Welcome back. It's still Health Matters on Channels Television. I'm afraid we got a bit carried away there, and we'll have to close really soon. But here we are with the interview. Now, there's this thing about recovered people who have recovered from Ebola, actually still being able to transmit this virus. How does that work out?
Oh, well, yeah,
maybe a man to his wife.
We need to remember that Ebola can survive in semen for up to 50 days.
50 days?
Up to 7 weeks. 7 weeks, about 49 days.
Almost 2 months.
Yes. So Ebola can survive in male, in seminal fluid for up to 50 days. So it can actually infect his partner that way. So that's a potent, especially if it's not the very severe fulminant case that we all see. So that is all. That we need to sign a lot of
precaution has to be taken
in that.
How about a woman feeding her baby, or won't she be able to feed her baby after such a recovery?
If I was faced with that scenario, I would probably go for bottle feeding.
I guess.
Maybe a surrogate.
Okay. Now, maybe we'll just take our very last question. We were talking about people coming out on the street in Liberia and just falling down dead.
And just dropping down dead.
People have spoken of guidelines of decontamination. Assuming we had, somebody who came down with Ebola and it was taken from his house, I assume his house will need a decontamination. Can you just tell us what the members of that household may have to do, or must the authorities decontaminate the house for them?
Yeah, well, there are different. We have chemical means of decontamination. People also fumigate. There are some chemicals, like the likes of some chemicals that we can use to.
How about bleach?
Well,
can they use it to wash down the house?
Some people, there are different strengths of bleach. We have extra strong. We have strong. We have weak. The popular weak, the bleach which we use at home. Okay. There are different strengths, But the authorities, that's best left for the authorities. There are protocols and guidelines, which we will use to decontaminate that household, and of course, isolate. Well, not necessarily isolate the immediate contacts, but observe them, put them under surveillance. The individual who came into Nigeria was actually under surveillance, but he had a meeting here, came down, and the rest is history. But the key thing is surveillance of such contacts.
Okay.
Very important.
Well, I'm afraid we are going to have to stop it there. We're out of time. Thank you so much for coming.
It's been my
Dr.
pleasure.
Shubawale. Thank you for being with us there. I know I didn't let you call in. I got carried away, but I hope you learned 1 or 2 things. Thanks for being with us. And remember, stay safe, wash your hands, proper hand washing, and enjoy the rest of your day. I am Mary Alale Yusuf.